You know that feeling when you look at a workflow in your company and it's just a tangled mess? You're not sure who does what or when things are supposed to happen? It's a super common problem. But there's an amazing, brilliantly simple tool that can bring order to all that chaos. So let's map our way to clarity.
Right? So you've got this process. It probably involves a bunch of different people, maybe even different departments. Information is supposed to get passed around. Decisions have to be made. But from the outside, it just looks like a total free-for-all. How do you even begin to get a handle on that, let alone try to make it better?
Well, the answer is actually surprisingly simple. You give everyone a lane. That's it. This one core idea is exactly what makes a swim lane diagram such an incredibly powerful tool for literally anyone trying to bring clarity to a complex workflow.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to untangle what these diagrams are all about. Then, we'll dissect their basic anatomy before we look at some more advanced tools. After that, we'll actually build a real-world example together, and finally, we'll see why this skill is a genuine superpower for any team.
All right, let's start with the foundation. To draw these kinds of process maps, we really need a common language, a set of symbols that everyone agrees on, and that language is called BPMN.
BPMN, or Business Process Model and Notation, is pretty much the global standard for this stuff. I want you to think of it like a musical score, but for business operations. It's this shared visual language that lets anyone, from the CEO all the way down to a brand new hire, understand the flow, the tasks, and the decisions. It creates a single source of truth.
And this, right here, this is the magic of the swim lane. Just like in a swimming race, each lane keeps a participant on their own track. That visual separation instantly gets rid of confusion and creates crystal clear accountability. You know exactly who is responsible for what, just at a glance. It's that simple.
So, how do we actually build one of these? Well, it all comes down to 5 fundamental components. Once you get these 5 building blocks, you can read and create pretty much any process map you come across.
First up, we've got the lanes themselves. Each one represents a participant. Now, that could be a specific person, like a manager, a role like customer support, or even a whole department like warehouse. This structure immediately answers that crucial question: who does this?
Now, inside those lanes, you have activities. These are the little rounded rectangles, and they represent the actual work that's being done, the specific tasks. So if a lane answers who, the activity answers what. Things like verify payment or prepare shipment. Makes sense, right?
So, how do we connect all the what's? We use sequence flows. These are simply the arrows that guide you through the process, showing the order of operations. They create the path that the work follows as it moves from one activity to the next, and sometimes they'll even cross between lanes.
But business processes are rarely just a straight line, are they? That's where gateways come in. These diamond shapes are the decision points, the if-then moments in any workflow. A gateway asks a question, something like, is the payment approved? And then it sends the workflow down a different path depending on the answer.
And finally, we have events. These are represented by circles. Every process needs a beginning and an end, right? A start event kicks the whole thing off, and an end event shows where it all concludes. You can also have these things called intermediate events, which are like triggers that happen mid-process. Maybe a timer goes off or a specific message is received.
Okay, so with those 5 building blocks, you can map out almost anything. But for the really complex situations, let's look at a few specialized tools that can really level up your diagrams.
You see, not all gateways are created equal. The most common one you'll see is the exclusive gateway. This is where the process has to choose one path and only one. Think approved or rejected. But then you've got a parallel gateway, which is totally different. It splits the process to do multiple things at the exact same time. For instance, maybe the legal and finance teams can both start their reviews simultaneously.
Now, here's an even more interesting one, the event-based gateway. Instead of making a decision based on data, it actually just waits for an event to happen. For example, the process might pause and wait. Is the customer going to respond? Or is the 48-hour deadline going to pass first? The path forward depends entirely on which one of those events happens first. Pretty cool, right?
And 2 other really powerful tools help manage all that complexity. First, there's a subprocess. This lets you bundle a whole bunch of detailed steps into one single clean activity. It keeps your main map from getting cluttered. And second, we have data objects. These are just little visuals that show what specific information or document is needed for a task, like an application form, making the requirements totally clear.
Theory is great, but let's make this real.
Let's actually build a swimlane diagram for a classic business process that we all understand, fulfilling an e-commerce order.
Building a good diagram always follows a logical sequence. First, we identify the overall process. Then we define who's involved. Those are our participants for the lanes. Next, we map out their specific activities. After that, we layer in the complexity with gateways and events. And finally, and this is the most important step, we review it with the people who actually do the work every day.
So for our e-commerce example, we've got 4 key participants, and each one gets their own lane: the customer, the sales team, the warehouse, and the delivery team. The process kicks off with the customer placing an order. Then the workflow moves over to the sales team's lane so they can verify the payment. From there, it goes to the warehouse. See? You can immediately see the handoffs between the teams.
Now let's add a decision. Right after the sales team verifies the payment, we'll drop in an exclusive gateway. If the payment is approved, the sequence flow continues on its merry way to the warehouse. But if it's rejected, the flow goes down a completely different path, maybe to an activity called Notify Customer of Failure, and then straight to an end event.
We can even add more detail without making a big mess. In the warehouse lane, that prepare shipment activity could actually be a subprocess, hiding a bunch of smaller steps like check stock or reorder items. And we could add an intermediate event that only triggers an automatic reorder process when inventory for an item drops below a certain level. See how powerful this is?
Okay, so we've learned the what and the how. But now for the most important part, the why. Why is mastering this simple diagramming technique such a powerful skill for you and for your team?
Well, the payoff is huge. These diagrams make invisible complexity easy to see and understand. They instantly reveal the bottlenecks where work is piling up. They are an incredible tool for getting everyone in a room aligned on how things actually work, not just how we think they're supposed to. From documenting processes to training new hires, this becomes the map you use to constantly get better. Ultimately, it all comes down to this. Clarity leads to improvement. And now that you have the tool, the only real question left is, what's the first chaotic process you're going to go out there and clarify?